Hello, Craig here, and today we're going to be covering structuring your meals, the PowerPoint presentation itself, feeding for success. So, what we will be covering today. What's important to training and recovery? The most important sort of meals of the training day itself, structuring your training day meals and how to plan them out, how to have a look at structuring your non-training day meals, and any sort of other considerations to be tied on the end, such as early morning training or late evening training. Now, an important notice that you can see at the bottom is I'm not a dietitian. This is for your information and to be used as an aid for educational and support purposes only. The point of this PowerPoint presentation is just to give you a little bit more information to aid in making better choices for yourself. So, what we're going to cover in this first slide is what's important for training and recovery. So it can be boiled down to a nice simple statement. Carbs are king, protein's queen, gains and performance are the princelings. If you want the last two, you need to get the first two squared away. So from a muscle development standpoint, protein's the workers, carbs are paid. Nothing gets done without people getting paid. And this transfer is quite important over to repair and growth, due to the fact without the lack of good quality carbs, there is a risk later on of potential injuries due to the fact of the ever increasing levels of loads and stressors on the body throughout training, without the lack of glycogen and ATP available to help the muscles work. From a performance standpoint, carbs are good, because carbs are our main fuel source throughout our training sessions. So, this is a bit of a myth, but it tends to float about quite a lot. I thought I'd quickly cover it now. Fats is used during training. The answer is not directly. It's not direct energy pathway itself. So the fat molecule itself, also known as triglycerides, are inherently too long as a energy structure to be broken down and used as an immediate energy source. So what happens is they get broken down and turned into glycerol, trying to remember my words, and fatty acids. And these are what's used through energy processes in the body, which we're going to talk about slightly later on. So, to get to your goals, you kind of have to have carbs and protein in your diet. Without them, you're not going to achieve what you want as quickly as what you could do. Now, it's all about a balance at the end of the day, and that's what we're working towards in this PowerPoint presentation. So, moving on to the next slide. Now, this one's a bit of a longer one. There's a little bit of explaining to be going through in this one. So, next we're going to discuss the sort of three main pathways that that our body uses during training and through activity. Now, this being said, this is just a quick overview itself of the energy pathways. There will be more detail provided later on in a separate presentation. So first we have ATP/CP energy pathways. So this is our immediate energy. So this is what's sitting in our muscles ready to go and what we use immediately when you initiate training. So as you can see there, it's used in high intensity training. So ATP, also known as, let me just pronounce this correctly because I'm going to butcher it in advance, adenosine triphosphates, I'm sure I've butchered the first word, is found in all sort of cells and is responsible for all sort of cellular processes itself. Think of it as like the energy currency, so it fuels the first 5 to 10 seconds of near maximal energy. After that short duration, the body moves on to other energy systems to produce the energy itself. So think of this, so when it comes to sprinting, this is where sprinters use up this kind of energy pathway. So this is the big one that they tend to use in sprinting to maximize it. It's also used in one rep maxes and explosive movements. So that's where it relates over to training itself. Now, interesting fact, completely pointless and off topic, but I'm going to add it in anyway. is that if you've ever watched Blade 1, the first Blade movie, they talk about ATP as a weapon they use to burst open vampires, and this is the stuff that they're actually talking about. Random fact that I thought I'd add in. So, the next topic we're going to cover is the next energy pathway, which is the glycolic pathway. So, this is the one that's mainly one of the more prevalent energy systems used in weight training itself. So, it kind of fuels the first 30 to 120 seconds of near maximal activity itself. The system relies on dietary carbohydrates and glycogen, which is sort of stored glucose, to create ATP itself. Now, it's another system that doesn't actually require oxygen to generate ATP. So by proxy, this is the reason why this one kind of causes lactic acid, which is just an interesting random fact I thought I'd add on as well. Finally, the last one, the last sort of energy pathway that we use is the oxidative pathway, and this is the one that uses our carbs and fatty acids and protein to produce energy in the presence of oxygen itself. So this is the first sort of aerobic production of energy from the carbohydrates, the lipids, and sometimes protein itself. This is used to fuel your body through its daily activities and prolong low intensity exercise and long duration training. So out of the three systems, this is probably the one that you can train most and have the greatest amount of effect on through long distance cardio, etc. This is the one that marathon runners incredibly heavily lean into from their training standpoints, and then we go on from there. So like I said at the bottom, we will cover these all in much more detail in a separate session itself. So what we're going to cover next is the most important meals of the training day itself. Now, much to contrary belief, the breakfast isn't the most important meal of the day when it comes to your training meals. So we kind of work on a system that when on training days, the most important meals of your day are your pre and post-workout meals. The pre-workout meal, this will make you train harder. And then the post-workout meal, because this will make your recovery better. And at the end of the day, that's where we sort of want to stick our priorities when it comes to our training day nutrition, is to focus in and around training to make sure we can get the most out of training. This has a few sort of knock-on effects. If you have a good training session, it'll help you feel mentally better. And then that plays a huge factor in it. And this is why it's such important. The pre-workout meal is so important, because by having a good, decent quality meal beforehand, I think it really does help in training, make training feel better, make you feel like you can push harder and further and longer. And that hard work transfers over into a better feeling afterwards once you're done. When it comes to the post-workout meal, it's key for recovery, and that's the important thing. Now, when it comes to this, I might explain it in the next slide, I'm not too sure. If you haven't worked out yet that these are getting cut and put together, they are, because I am absolutely terrible at talking to cameras, I'll tell you right now. But the anabolic window is a bit of a myth as well. So this whole sort of you've got to eat something within 30 minutes is a bit of bullshit. What you actually do is anabolic window very much depends on your training length. So if you are brand new to training, then it can last up to 24 hours. Even in experienced lifters, it's about 3 to 4 hours long afterwards. As long as you're getting a decent meal in afterwards, then that will help sort of on a recovery standpoint. So with that, we move on to the next page in our PowerPoint presentation. So this is our training day meal template that I tend to find works best for myself and a lot of my clients that ask about it. Now I will say, as you can see at the top, this is not mandatory to follow. There is other ways you can plan stuff, but I generally think that this seems to be the kind of best way that I have found works for myself and my own clients through experience. So pre-workout is probably arguably, if not the most, then the second most important meal of the day. Just to how you perform, high GI carbs are kind of what you're looking for in this, with a chunk of protein and quite low fats, because low dietary fats tend to take a little bit longer to digest. Now the issue with that is if they're sitting in your stomach, especially with like dietary fats and low GI carbs, when you start training you're going to pull blood away from your stomach into your muscles, so that sits there, and sometimes that sitting there is going to make you feel ill. So what we tend to look at, so like 20 to 30% of your carbs from your day in the form of high GI carbs, so like cereals, or if you saw my big massive block of rice cake on my one of my training days, yeah, I have that before I train because it's just full of high GI carbs. It's good, it tastes nice, it fixes my sweet tooth, and then I take that with that protein shake with skim milk, and the reason for that is just to keep the fats nice and low and to get my protein level in. Now that's my sort of pre-workout meal itself. It's just to add that in as a selection. So post-workout meal afterwards is the recovery, king, queen, wherever you want to go with. So as we discussed in the previous slides with muscle pair and growth, the post-workout meal is essential. Now, ideally, you want to be having, this is where you want to be taking your main bulk, your carbs afterwards, and you want to be taking them in, as you can see here, in a sort of mixture of high and low GI carbs. So you tend to see a lot of people go for Cocoa Pops. Again, it's to hit the sweet tooth and to fix that. Then protein again is a nice equal portion and a small amount of fats as well afterwards to help with recovery. So from a meal perspective in this, I don't know if you saw recently, I had the burritos. Excuse me. So the burritos themselves were sort of like filled with rice, which is a high GI carb. The wraps, which are slightly lower GI carb due to the fact that they were wholemeal. But as well as that, I had the grapes, which was another sort of high GI option. Now, the chicken itself was just prepped, and there was a little bit of oils used, which essentially covered my 10 to 15% of my fat. And then the next one we look at afterwards is the meal sort of furthest away from training. And this is where we want to take in a large amount of our carbs. Carbs sitting at sort of like 9 calories per gram of carbs. They take a lot longer to digest, so they're always slightly more efficient to be used slightly further away from training than during training itself. It's also a good way to help you stay full for longer, and then we go on to that. So carbs alongside that meal, it's just sort of like I tend to balance my remaining carbs out throughout the rest of the day. And my protein again is just another sort of equal portion compared to my previous one. And then any other remaining meals is kind of a split of wherever I have sitting left, just to keep things nice and simple. So I'm just quickly reading through my notes to make sure I haven't missed anything, because I'm finding it slightly easier, as you can tell now, to talk due to the fact that I'm just being honest with you. But that's it. Like, when it comes to protein, you don't need super high levels. We'll talk through that in the protein video to be exact, but too much just becomes expensive poop. So what we have here is just a quick example that I've put together of a person who'd be training on 3,500 calories a day across a 4-meal split. So we set up the initial meals themselves, which is the pre-workout meal at 125 grams of carbs, 50 grams of protein, and 5 grams of fat. The reason why the fats are there, although we want to try and keep them as minimally as possible, we have to take into consideration that there are probably some fats just naturally in most food choices that we tend to choose as part of our pre-workout meals themselves. Post-workout meal comes next, and we hit the heavy with a nice big block of carbs in the way of 225 grams. Again, 50 grams of protein and 15 grams of fat. And then this is just a nice big meal to be at a couple of hours after training. It'll fill you up and make you feel good. It's a mixture of fast and slow GI carbs, and then we move on to the next meal, which is the meal that we tend to plan furthest from our training. This is the one where we're aiming to get as much of our fats in as possible. So as you can see in this, we've set up 50 grams of fat, we've got 50 grams of protein in there as well, and then we've got 40 grams of carbs. And then for the remaining meal, we've gone for 30 grams of fats, 60 grams of carbs and 50 grams of protein. Now this is a four meal plan. Again, you could go to 5, you could go to 3. It's really up to yourself how you want to structure your meal plan itself. This is just trying to give you an idea of how to work best in this sort of situation. So the non-training day is fairly easy to talk through, and it's pretty much how you work from the previous slide. It's just splitting it up on averages. So if you're having 4 meals a day, just make them all sort of like balance your days across everything. Another option you might consider is you can sometimes keep the sort of similar structure, only you swap certain things. So you might not have as much carbs, so you still might have an extremely carb heavy meal. Your morning meal might be sort of like fat heavy if you're training later on in the day, etc. So it's an option there. Like non-training days, just need the targets and just make sure you meet them. But one thing I would say with non-training days is trying to avoid large amounts of carbs directly before bedtime, because it can affect sleep, and we'll discuss that in the sleep section later on. So the last sort of PowerPoint presentation of the day, and the last slide, is the considerations. So there's 2 sort of main considerations we have to take into thought. So the first one is training late at night. Now this is a must for some people, and I tend to see a few of my clients have to deal with this as well. So post carbs afterwards should be trying to minimized, due to the fact that they will affect your sleep pattern. The thermodynamic effect of breaking down the carbs will increase your body's internal temperature, which may affect your sleeping pattern. Also, large amounts of carbs after you finish training might sit in your stomach and make you feel uncomfortable. So what we aim for is trying to do some form of carb loading on the run up to training to make training more efficient, but also the carbs there that we use afterwards. So what I might suggest, again suggestion, not something you have to cover, is maybe taking your pre-workout meal, keep a high GI carbs, but take your meal before that as low GI carbs, so they take slightly longer to break down and get some benefit of them sitting there after training. Now, as for training on early mornings, which tends to be the other big issue you tend to face, we aim for a good quality amount of carbs, so like in the evening beforehand may help. But when we're training in the morning, it's always a consideration to potentially take something like the liquid carbs in the way of energy drinks, etc. The ones that are full of high GI carbs that hit the system and get into the bloodstream nice and quickly. So these are things like Lucozade, etc. So here endeth the PowerPoint presentation. So once it's all been snipped together and put up, I should have this up and we'll be tagging it in the video itself. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you find this beneficial. And if you've got any questions, feel free to ask. I will point out this is the first time I've ever done this, so I apologise if it's a little bit cut up, because I've had to do the several separate videos itself, and you know what I'm like for nerves when it's doing new things. Okay, I'll catch you all later and enjoy your days.